On this show, we're driven by curiosity. We want to chart a path forward. Best people, best conversations. We're on a journey and it's just getting started. All right, everybody, we are live. I am Jack Murphy. This is the Jack Murphy Live Show. And today we have a very special guest, someone that I am very much looking forward to. I hadn't even known who this guy was until Barnes and he invited me onto his podcast. And boy, did he give me a grilling on his show. And I really appreciated it. And that was one of the reasons why I wanted to continue our conversation to learn much more about this guy. Today we have with us live from the authoritarian jail state of Canada, we have my very good friend now, Mr. David Freiheit. How you doing, buddy?
Very good in yourself, Jack.
I am doing phenomenally well. I can't complain at all. You know, the summer, fall transition weather's happening in DC. Life is good, not a worry in the world. Nothing to be concerned about at all. No announcements coming from the President of the United States today that will impact your day-to-day life if you're not vaccinated. I can't wait to see what's going on there, but we're going to get to all that stuff. Thank you so much for joining me up there in Canada. How's it going? How's it going in Canada? I keep saying that. I don't know why.
Oh, don't worry. People say Canada, they say Kanakistan, they say a number of things to refer to what is going on in Canada. We're not yet at Australian level tyranny, but we're not far off. And it's been, I won't say getting to me, it's gotten to me to the point where I've decided to run for office. But the other day, someone shared a story with me that multiple high school students, 13-year-old kids, were denied tryouts for the high school team because they had not downloaded the vaccine app passport system, QR code identification that our government has implemented. And these kids were actually denied the right to, and I'm not saying it is a privilege, a right to try out on their sports team. That enraged me to the point of actual loss of words and a little bit of tears of frustration. But that's what's going on in Canada.
Yeah, when I give my spiel about how if you listen to the establishment, you end up fat, sick, chained to a desk, working for corporate America, in student loan debt forever. And then I throw in there, and if you're in Canada, locked up in your basement with your kid locked up in the bedroom next door to you, unable to get out, you sliding grilled cheeses underneath the bottom of the door frame. And that's, not too terribly far off from some of the things that I have heard up there. But let's put a pause on that because I want to get to all that stuff. But
gotta start from the beginning, though.
Just be like, I didn't necessarily know who you were. I knew Craig Barnes, and he and I had met, and I had been on his show a couple times. He did a show on InfoWars. I don't know if he's still doing that, but we had a great time. Smart guy. And so when the two of you approached me to come on the show, I was like, heck yeah. I did not know who you were. And boy, I was sitting there between the two of you guys. I know it was friendly. It was a little bit of a cross-examination. I really appreciated it. And so I want to know who that guy was grilling me that day. And I think that my audience wants to know too, because you're doing some really exciting stuff. So give me just like the 2-minute pitch that you give everybody. And then I've got some specific questions I want to drill down on here.
All right. Now, so I'm a Montrealer, born and raised. I want to rhyme it with the Fresh Prince, but no. Born and raised, I went to youngest of 5 kids, family of lawyers. 4 of the 5 kids are lawyers. My dad's a lawyer. We have all since, many of us have married into other lawyers in the family. I had an interesting adolescenthood. I bounced around from 3 high schools in 5 years, ultimately graduated. Luckily, I went to CEGEP, Dawson College, did very well there, went to McGill, got an undergrad in philosophy, honors philosophy, minor in history, went into law, as do all, good kids of the community. You become a doctor, you become a lawyer. Became a lawyer, did that at the big law firm, one of the biggest law firms in Canada. Never liked one day more than the last. After the birth of my first kid, I took a few months off. I'm going real fast, but took a few months off, went back to work, did not ever want to live with that lifestyle. One Friday afternoon, spontaneously told them I can't do this anymore, I'm leaving. Thought I was going to go back to commercial photography at Dawson, applied, and then before I could get rejected after being on the waiting list for a couple of months, people started calling me, asking me for legal work. And at the time, I actually do believe I was living in my parents' basement with my wife and our first kid. So no overhead. People start calling up. It's like I started doing the work. Then I realized I had to get a small office, got a small office, got so much work within a year, had to get a paralegal, found another lawyer to work with. We had a great team. A few years later, my dad was removed from the partnership as a question of contracts within his firm, wanted to continue practicing. We came together. We grew to a firm of 7 at one point. Great boutique litigation firm. Never loved one day more than the last, even on my own. And then one day said, I'm stopping this. I'm going to try to succeed in media marketing, YouTube. Before the channel became a law theme channel, wound up the litigation practice, took about a year, and then started vlogging daily. And then, as fate would have it, it turned into a law channel, but we'll get there.
That, I have so many cousins and friends and family who are attorneys. And in my life, I have hired many, many attorneys. And because I used to be in real estate, and then I used to run, pretty large nonprofits. And so we had use for attorneys all the time. And I never met one that was like, yo, bro, I love this. God, I love it. I wake up every day. I'm so excited to be a lawyer. How much did you hate it, dude? Tell me how much you hated it and why. Why in particular?
Okay, so I had one, maybe two mentors in my practice who I genuinely believed, genuinely loved it. And they were peculiar people. Not one of them was a very good person. He wasn't even like, a closet serial killer. He was a good person. Loved the practice, loved the strategy, loved the technical aspect of it, loved the social aspect of it. But for me, look, you figure you have one life on this earth. You want to have purpose. You get into the practice of law thinking it's going to be a purposeful existence. You think it's going to be about justice, fairness. You're going to change the world. It starts off by pushing paper. I mean, quite literally, but you have to work your way up in terms of practice. You got to get, what is the word? Not groomed, but you got to get trained. There's a word, I forget what it is, but like, you need to be taught how to do the menial, tedious things before you can go into a cross-examination. So you start off by highlighting jurisprudence, doing research, preparing memos, and you work your way up. And you keep telling yourself, or at least I kept telling myself, it'll be better when, it'll be better when, it'll be better when. And it never got better, even when you got into the more substantive stuff of the practice. I was in commercial litigation. You just realize it's endless stress and not good stress. It's endless paper pushing and not good paper pushing. You're helping people fight over, at the very least in commercial litigation, money, family, contracts. People are just fighting day in and day out. Your clients are unhappy. They're unhappy when it goes well. They're even more unhappy when it goes badly.
Right.
You are always living with this threat, not just from your own clients or not just from opposing counsel or the opposing party, but from your own clients as well, because you have to cover your butt at all times from all sides. When things go bad, your clients are going to blame you. When they go well, they're going to complain that the bill was too much type thing. And so it's endless. It's day in and day out. And it became purposeless to me. I would leave the house. This was after my kid was born, when it really came to a cataclysmic Friday afternoon. Get to the office at 7:00, leave the office by 7:00. Kid would be sleeping when I left, sleeping when I came back. I would be, at some point, you can't make enough money to justify or to compensate for the loss of enjoyment of life. It's just like being in a very fancy prison. And I said, I can't do this. If I don't die of a heart attack by the time I'm 50, if I'm 50 and still doing this, I won't be happy with myself. But then the question is, what do you do? Because you work yourself into this corner where I was 30, give or take, 36 when I really decided I was going to wind it down. But you get to be 40, you have a kid, 2 kids, private school, you can't even back out of it. And so you end up being cornered and having no choice. And then it's just becomes a question of convincing yourself you love it when you don't. But so it was a Friday afternoon. I said, I can't do this. I'm miserable. I'm not at a point now where I can't make a change. And if I don't make a change, I'll never make the change.
Yeah. How scary was that to let go of the thing that all of your friends and family expected of you? You put all this time and energy and effort into building, you took a leap from, first you took a leap from working at a big law firm to starting out on your own. And that takes a certain kind of mindset, right? Because at the big law firms, from what I understand, there's 3 types of lawyers. There's finders, minders, and grinders. And
that is the expression.
Yep. And so you never want to be the grinder. I think being a minder is okay. And the real money is being the finder. But when you launch out on your own, you got to be all three. You got to grind. You got to take care of yourself. You got to feed your family, find your own clients, do your own research, write your own papers, make your own faxes, all those things. So that takes some risk.
It's, the biggest thing. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go for it, man.
I was going to say that the biggest difference that I noticed was not having the protective barrier that a big firm offers you between you and the client, you and the real world. When you go it on your own, you're making the calls, you're making the first meetings. If there's an ethics complaint, you don't have HR to deal with that ethics complaint for you. I never had one, but when you have clients that get angry, collection, you don't have people collecting money for you. You got to call up your client and say, hey, do you mind paying my bill type thing? And that was the most difficult thing, is not having the protective barrier that the big firm offers between the problems and the practice. But yeah, no, the finder, minder, grinder, I was always a finder of sorts. Like, I could make a client wherever I went, and I literally did pretty much everywhere I went.
By pushing people down the stairs?
No. We don't have that type of personal liability in Canada. But contracts, leases. I remember when I just went to an apple orchard, turned into a client. It's what happens when you just talk to people. But
right.
And I was able to, family connections as well. Conflicts coming from bigger firms where my dad was at led to clients. And the really amazing thing that I never even could understand until it happened is, at a big firm, when you're a first year lawyer and they're billing you out at $3.50 an hour, give or take. When you go out on your own and you're that same lawyer and you're billing at $2.50 an hour, and it's basically net because you don't spend 50 cents on every dollar for overhead. I mean, you can make a very, very good living being the exact same lawyer, but you've gotten that pedigree, so to speak.
Right.
The investment that was involved in that, I mean, people have to appreciate it's 4 years of undergrad, 3.5 years of law school, 6 months of bar school, 6 months of internship. And then at one point I'm like, yeah, but my father, my wife, they could not have seen me, that miserable any longer, despite how good it all looked from the outside. They knew there was no real choice.
Yeah, there's a reason why there's a lot of fat, divorced, upset, angry lawyers out there. There's a lot of them. And I live in the capital of lawyers in all of the world, here in Washington, D.C. Basically, the only diversity in my kids' school is like which area of law does their parent practice, right? That, and what foreign country are they from? Because of all the ambassadors here. But it just seemed like every lawyer I ever had said to me, you'd make a great lawyer. I'm like, yeah, no, absolutely not, no chance. But I want to ask.
Please. Sorry.
Dave, go for it, friend. This is all about you. This is the you show today.
It's the unhealthy. It is the unhealthy lifestyle that comes with the practices. Eating out. You're eating out during the day, at night. The lawyers will buy ourselves a nice road bikes, but then you have to find time to use it. And yes, it leads to. I don't know if the divorce rate is higher among lawyers than any other demographic, but it's high, and I knew it. And the spiritual, physical, unhealthy lifestyle that I found, it was prevalent. But yeah, that was what I was going to add.
And that's even on your own, independent, working at your own hours too. It even becomes like that, dealing with your own clients. But this transition that you made, and I'm laughing because I've made the same transition from, I have a master's degree from Georgetown. I've worked at hedge funds and private equity corporations. I have worked in corporate America and in the institutions and all the things, government even. So like, I left all that aside, not necessarily by choice, and jumped out into this wild world of content creation, YouTube, Twitter, social media, the whole thing. And you've done the same thing, not necessarily as pushed off the cliff as I was, literally. You elected to jump off the cliff. And now let me ask you, when you jumped off that cliff, did you have a parachute? Did you have like what do you call it? Were you hang glide? Or were you just like in free fall and you're like, man, bro, I better make this work. What was that? What was that like, dude?
And it's an amazing thing. I remember reading one comment on a YouTube video back in the day. And it was hypothesizing that someone said that I must have family money, which I didn't, and I don't. Then someone else said he must have saved up and had a good cushion, which I didn't. So it was always a hairline, or what is it? A razor's edge is not even the right word. Like was the prospect of having to give up the entire dream and go back to the practice was not just real. It would keep me up at night. And, so it was reckless. I mean, there's no other way. It was reckless. I knew I could make ends meet. My wife knew that I could make ends meet. Marion one of the anecdotes is when we were making this decision, I said, we're going to wind up the litigation practice and I'm going to make a go for it. And she said, if you can make $200 or $300 selling a video where you tie a plastic bag to an iPhone, we're going to be all right. And that was in reference to one of the videos that I sold and licensed, which was I tied a bag to my iPhone, swung it around on a rope. The bag created a drag. And when you played it in slow motion, it basically looked like a 360 camera. Okay. It was a small tutorial licensed out for a few $100. And at that point, we're like, if you can do that and you can make money with a plastic bag and a phone, we're going to find a way.
Yeah.
And, it was fate. It was luck. It was good fortune. It was just the way the world went. I found the niche, but at that time, I wasn't focused on law. I was just focused on viral videos, random video licensing, learning YouTube, learning editing. But, it was all part of some, I'd not say unwritten plan, but it all worked out very well because by the time the law side of the channel, I discovered the niche, what I had to niche down on and put out there. I could edit a video, reasonably quality editing, catchy editing within a day. So if there's an event in the news, I could get out there, go film the first day marijuana was legalized in Montreal and put the video together the same day in a way that will blow away any of the traditional media. CBC will not put together a fun, well-edited, catchy video. And it all came together. So I could put these videos together quickly. As the news items came up, I could put my legal expertise to use, my legal insights to use. And that, that's when the channel took off. I figured out what I had to do. And then it became sustainable. And then it became, then I could actually pay off debt. And that's when, that's when we knew that it was like the risk of having to give it all up and go back to the 7-to-7 legal world that I never want to go back to if I can help it. It became a reality.
That's incredible. Was there a moment along the way where you were like, okay, this is going to work or this wasn't going to work? Like, how long did you put in before that moment where you're like, okay, we're paying down debt now and I'm actually making a career out of this? Yes, my education is influential in what I'm talking about. It's given me a wide background in order to speak eloquently on a number of different subjects. I'm putting words in your mouth here. But none of that prepared you specifically for what you were doing. So for people out there, because I get this question all the time, and unfortunately, my answer isn't very helpful to people. But it's like, how do you get to this point? Like, what's the magic sauce? What is the secret? What was the transition point? Is there something that you learned along the way that you would pass on to people who are interested in this industry, or what happened?
Well, so I mean, it's an interesting thing. People look at some stories and they look at them as though they're overnight successes just because they haven't lived the 5 years that led up to it. I mean, I've been making random YouTube videos since 2014. And it was only in 2018 when I niched down on law that we went from 50,000 subs to 100, and then within the year to 200, and now we're at 380,000. It was, you have to learn the tools. It all just came together over time. But it was the niching down that really allowed the channel to take off, because I never fully appreciated the YouTube algorithm, and not the algorithm in like the gaming sense, but YouTube. A channel has to know who to promote your channel to, your videos to. And if you're making law videos one day, cooking videos another day, fishing videos another day, 30-second videos to 20-minute videos, your audience doesn't know what to expect. YouTube doesn't know what to do. So the only time I really noticed things started taking off was when we niched down on law, and then I realized also I could develop a form, I could develop a structure. And I would never have any shortage. I wouldn't have to go looking for content. I wouldn't have to force the content. I wouldn't have to become self-exploitive in order to create the content. It was just there. And if I could continue with a certain level of quality, it would just continue to grow. I just had no idea the amount of fortuitous connections that we would make along the way. But it was niching down. That was the one thing. And creating something of a structure and a formula so that people knew what they were getting when they came. And then the biggest part also was networking in a very informal sense, making cross collaborations with other content creators on YouTube. And I've got to thank Robert for really making me appreciate that. But in the backdrop, it was I had a friend, Jay, who, if he's watching, will know I'm talking about him, who emailed me, and we became email friends. But he said, you're focusing on the content, but you also have to focus on the community. And then you expand your community when you cross with other communities. And so it really was niching a structure, a form, a template, cross community collaborations, and also just not compromising integrity and remaining intellectually honest all along the way.
And never giving up. I mean, that's pretty much. That's
and then, you know, Jack, you asked me, I had many moments where I was, I mean, I wake up in the night all the time, but I mean, I had many moments which were like, some might call them anxiety attacks in the night of, you know, anxiety attacks in the night where like, you know, this, I can't, we can't do this anymore. We're on too much of a razor. At one point, you know, while I was building all this up, I was sitting on this lithium mining stock that I had. And I was like, okay, well, worst comes to worst, I can always sell that stock and pay the bills. And then the company went bankrupt. And I was like, holy crap, I just lost whatever cushion I thought I had. And, you know, that was the dark moments. And then, you know, the day when I realized it's going to happen is when I got to a certain amount of predictable views a month based on the content I was producing. I was like, okay, I can repeat this formula day in and day out and not have to be stressed and not have to, you know, do what a lot of channels do, which is just become increasingly exploitive of themselves, their family, or the world. Just consistent content creation. The material is there, just a question of putting in the work. But that's all. That's after once, you know, a base was there, a technique was there. I had learned editing. I had learned YouTube. I had learned about how the system works to some extent. And, you know, it's the learning curve. It took me 5 years, but I'm hopefully imparting it on others, and they can do it within a year once they find their niche.
So many great things to go off of what you just said there. I mean, I'm still learning the system itself. I'm trying, and you know, I have more of an ecosystem than just the YouTube channel, so I can be very specific in what I want to do. And this is sort of a vanity project in the sense that like I'm doing this because I'm interested in doing it, and that's why I'm doing it. And I think that authenticity is part of the currency that allows me to keep growing and people to keep watching. One thing that's been standing out in my mind as you're talking is the talent stack. That is an idea that Scott Adams laid out for me years ago, where, you know, it's like, don't just learn one thing. You have to learn like 5, 6, 7, 8 different things so that when you finally stack them all up together, you are the only one of you in this world. And when you take your law career and then your media experience and then you learn YouTube and then you put it all together and then find, oh, there we go. Now we've got a unique sellable product, or AKA something people are interested in. And that advice has really stuck with me. And I can see in the future for me how I'm going to go back on my real estate career and use everything that I've learned so far up to now, including everything with the Liminal Order, everything with social media, and then the real estate play that we've got planned. Really going to be, I think, my final expression. Well, hopefully not final, but a mature, a mature expression of my talent stack. Finally, and then the last thing on what you just said that I want to comment on is, I've said this for years, and I don't think people understand. The most powerful social media networks are built off of social media. You have to pick up the phone, you have to send a DM, you have to make a personal private connection with somebody. And then you're like, oh, sweet, we have this connection. Let's do a collaboration. Let's promote this. I'll help you promote that. And you get that mixing of communities that you're talking about. So guys, if you're out there and you're looking at social media, and if it ever feels to you like there's like a secret cabal with people who get together to promote each other's work and, you know, riff off similar themes and help each other out behind the scenes, guess what? You're absolutely right. And it comes, but it's not nefarious. It's just like, it's like good, positive, professional, you know, effort, right?
It's an amazing thing. And you're right. A network, people don't appreciate the value of a network until, on the one hand, they've used it to grow, or they need it to survive. And a network, it has actual, I say monetary value from a cynical perspective, but it has actual material value. A network of people who you can rely on in order to grow. And if there's a problem, then you can rely on for support. And at first I was island unto myself, putting out, you know, I didn't think I needed to collab. I didn't really want to. And then you realize, like, you start making friends, because it's nothing more than a group of friends that trust each other in terms of cross promotion, in terms of cross referencing, and it builds on its own. And at one point I was doing a stream, and someone said, well, why don't you have any of a certain political ideology on? And I say, well, I reach out to everybody. I just know who says yes. And then one person says, well, you should name the people who say no. It's like, why would I do that? I mean, that basically burns any network you might have existing or that you might aspire to grow, because you can network with people not who you don't like so much, but who you disagree with, and still have as much, if not a more meaningful network than if you just collaborate and network with people who think the same. And people do not appreciate how valuable a network is. And it is ultimately, it's based on skill, it's based on talent, but it's ultimately based on integrity, where if anyone's going to want to have you in their network, they're going to have to rely on and count on your integrity above all else. And so it's community. It's another word for community.
Indeed it is. And I'm glad that we're talking about this concept of networks right now, because one of the main thrusts of my work is working off the hypothesis, which doesn't sound, it's not in question really anymore, that all of our institutions are completely captured and corrupted. All of them: universities, media, education, K-12, government, medicine, arts and entertainment, sports. I mean, like, everything is completely captured, and the institutions are dead. And they're not only dead, but they're murderous. They're coming after you. They're trying to actively harm you, whether purposefully in their mind, like, let's harm these people, or not. But that's what their behavior and the effect is that they're having. And people will have this idea that they want to reform institutions. There's no reforming these institutions, people. Let that idea go. Let it go. They are done. They're captured. Ground up capture from the grassroots. The CEOs and the presidents and the prime ministers were I see how I threw that in for you there. We're the last ones to come to this freaking CRT party. Okay? It's been swelling up for decades. So forget about the institutions. Build a network. And a network is just a constellation of relationships, and they come together when they have utility for you. And this is a very stark way of saying that they're good, a good mutual exchange of good, right? They have utility for you. And so the network arises, it gives you meaning, it gives you friendship, it gives you professional opportunities, it gives you education if you form it the right way. And if it stops being positive for you, you can just disengage. You can just walk away from the network. Whereas an institution will never let you walk away. And they exist to perpetuate themselves. And in doing so, they create a tyrannical environment. And so the whole transition that I'm working off of right now is that institutions are corrupted. You must build networks to survive. You're only as strong as your network. You need a strong network to thrive in this world. It's a tribe, it's a gang, it's all these traditional notions as well, too. And it's not limited by your geography. It's based on your preferences, your tastes, your interests, your professional career. Are you seeing other people waking up to this idea that the institutions are dead and you need to build alternate support systems, which in this case will be networks, given our network society now?
So I may not be as, I don't think it's black pilled, but I may not be as defeatist. There is a critical mass at a critical point after which certain institutions can't be salvaged. But I mean, when you see like the banking system cutting people off for political ideologies, myself right now, seeing the political system in Canada within the institutions themselves, local municipal organizations organizing public debates and then finding ways to exclude certain parties from those debates across the country. I mean, they've certainly been poisoned. The question is whether or not there will be a swinging of the pendulum, or they're too far gone, and bankruptcy for certain institutions that are just too far gone is the only way to do it. But we've seen it over the last little while. I mean, I've seen it since I've been doing the vlogs. At first, I was not anywhere near aware of it. Then I sort of got red-pilled by my own research, seeing how the FBI, seeing how intelligence agencies are fundamentally corrupt. But I think they probably always have been, so it might not be any different now than it was then. But I've seen it. Right. I've seen it happen in real time. I've been, Dan Bongino talks about creating a parallel economic system. I see the way the forces are driving that to happen. But yeah, as far as it goes, just the network itself, if they come down on you, or if YouTube kicks you off the platform, if you have a network that's influential enough and responsive enough and engaged enough, they can make headway in terms of undoing the wrongs sometimes, or at the very least creating alternatives if the wrong will not be undone. And that's where networks like Locals comes into play in order to create this parallel economic system, parallel free speech system. But yeah, it's once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. The only question is, how far gone does any one individual think it is once they see it? Can it be salvaged? Can it be influenced? Can the Canadian political landscape possibly be salvaged from what it is right now, which is basically 4 or 5 political parties, all of whom agree with each other just to varying degrees. We'll see. And that might be the good segue into the next subject.
You know, you read my mind there, buddy. What do you do this for a living or something? Real quick, just a shout out to Jennifer Law in the super chats. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Good to see you as always. James Lindsay just had a tweet yesterday that I loved. He said, for all the people who are asking me who is going to stand up, we need someone to stand up. The answer is you. You are the people. You are the person that needs to stand up. My mom, when I argue with her, she tells me, history will just work this stuff out. The pendulum will swing, whatever. And you know what? That may be true if we're studying this 200 years from now and looking back and being like, oh yeah, well, in the next 15 years, this happened, you know? But in that intervening 15 years, there are individual human beings making change on the margin, putting themselves at risk, doing stuff. Sounds like you decided to pick up that call. Tell us what you're doing, man. Tell me how you came to this decision. Explain what it is, because I'm in America. I don't know. You guys got a king or something up there?
Not far off. It was, again, it's another one of those decisions that happens overnight, but took years to come to. I'm running for Parliament as a member of Parliament for the federal Canadian elections. Canada has a parliamentary system, which means that we've got members of Parliament on the federal level elected for electoral districts spread out throughout the country. We've got 338 of them. And I went straight for the federal for whatever the reason, but it was perhaps another one of those rash decisions that you make after 2 years of having your soul crushed by what you see around you. The channel started off as a law channel. Well, it started off as a random channel. When it niched into law, I was, breaking down depositions, Alex Jones. I was rehashing old lawsuits, the McDonald's hot coffee lawsuit. Then we get locked down for going on 2 years. And then what happens? We get locked down, and then, the COVID lawsuits start flying. I start looking at the Quarantine Act, but I say I don't want the channel to turn into a COVID channel. I mean, I want to talk about the other stuff, but the world went where it went, and it went from 2 weeks to 2 years. And I'm breaking down these lawsuits. I'm saying it doesn't make sense what we're doing. This cannot be constitutional. It can't be justified. And everyone's like, well, you do a lot of complaining. Put your money where your mouth is and maybe become, run for office. And then the other parallel reality is that, if stuff keeps getting worse and worse in Canada, I will contemplate my future in this country, but it is still my country and I still have an obligation to try to save it before I try to flee it. So I said I'm going to run for the country before I run from the country. And that's what I'm doing. So I threw my hat in the ring in a district that has been liberal for the last 30 years, with one exception somewhere in the 80s. And, if I lose, I lose. But at the very least, I want to give a voice to a real opposition. And I want to legitimize a political party that is the only one out there standing up for actual constitutional rights that has been by and large demonized by a fundamentally corrupt system. And you talk about the corruption, Jack. It's corruption through and through. You have the federal government subsidizing mainstream media, the CBC, which is our state broadcaster, to $1 billion a year, then handing out $600 million in bailout funds to the rest of the mainstream media. So you have the mainstream media, which is literally in the bag with the government, literally living off taxpayer dollars that are being laundered through the government to subsidize their activities. They pull the line for the government, and in so doing, they sue the Conservative Party for copyright infringement. They demonize the opposition parties, People's Party of Canada, call them racist, anti-vaxxers, yada, yada. And now I'm seeing the system that true opposition is up against, institutionalized corruption, leading to an uphill battle that is David versus Goliath proportions. And just ironically enough, my competitor, the liberal candidate in my riding, his name is Mark Garneau. So it literally is David versus Garneau. I'm just looking for someone to throw together a great meme of David versus Goliath with Garneau in the meme. But now this is where I'm truly becoming, I'm not going to say black-pilled, just red-pilled to what it means when government works with the media and the state of affairs that produces, because you see how it is easy to control, manipulate, and ultimately oppress a nation once those two massive forces are working in tandem.
Well, lots to talk about what you just said there, but the first thing that just comes to mind is that even the Chinese understand that the way to control Americans, North Americans, is through the media, through American media. Even they understand that actually our version of modern war centers now around the media as the main propaganda arm for an occupying force in America, basically. And by that, I include North America as well. And so it's very clear to people on the outside. It's very clear to people who are in the biz and who are pilled in some way about the media's role as an actual weapon of war, right? An actual weapon of war here. And yet, common people, regular folks, people, no slight on them, right? They're too busy. They're too busy figuring this stuff to figure this stuff out. They got to work. They're doing your life, your old life, 7 to 7, missing their kids, struggling to put food on the plate and make time to play catch with their son. I really feel for those folks, which is another reason why I want them to understand what's going on here. You have learned through it's been brief. It's only been, what, a few months, right, that you've announced and have been running?
Yeah, the political run's been a few months, but I mean, I had been, again, the practice leading up to to jumping into it for the last 2 years. I'd been covering from the legal side the scandals, the political scandals, the subsidizing of the media, the effects that has. I've been covering it, and now all of that exercise has built the muscles that I needed for this particular leg of the race.
It's weird when you see these crazy things happen, and you're like, that can't really be real. And then you do research and you figure it out, it's real. And then you're like, that's got to be an isolated incident. And then the next one, you're like, oh, that's a coincidence. And like not before too long, it takes a while to come face to face with these things that shatter your reality. Like, I didn't accept that radical feminism had taken over all of our institutions until I think even the Kavanaugh hearings. And I was like a red pill manosphere guy talking about radical feminism, all these things. But in the back of my mind, there's maybe like a little bit of like, is this a boogeyman? Are we putting too much emphasis on this? And then, dude, when you hear Kamala Harris and the rest of them in the Senate Judiciary Committee using the language of radical feminism, and then 2 or 3 years later, Joe Biden using the mutated language of radical feminism combined with Marxism and CRT and all this to declare white supremacy the number one threat in America. Of course, everyone who's white is a white supremacist, etc. You finally have to just accept that everything is kind of screwy.
Well, it was when politicians started actually using the word birthing people. And I mean, I don't know if that is what people understand by radical feminism, but sure. I just the bastardizing of language to a point that actually does an injustice, in my humble opinion, to an actual group of people, women. But birthing people, and they use, we see the double standard is that they use birthing people under certain circumstances, but then when it comes to the Texas abortion laws, then all of a sudden, no more birthing people. Then it's just man versus woman, and men don't have any say. Convenience, and it's an interesting thing. Like, I know your perspective is when we're looking for golf balls, sort of in the forest, and you see anything that's white looks like a golf ball. Your perspective is the radical feminism. Mine is FBI corruption. The Kavanaugh hearings. I didn't notice the radical feminism side of it to the extent it exists. I noticed the FBI corruption. That you can have politicians, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. You know what you need to do. Go find us a complaint from 30 years ago. And file a complaint with the FBI, and this is how we're going to weaponize all of the intelligence agencies to derail a confirmation hearing. That was what I took from it. But it's a diverse world, and everyone is taking their own lessons from these massive events. But yeah, but the birthing people it was almost like people were following orders to start using that term in the U.S., in Canada. It was weird, almost as weird as Build Back Better, where you start to seeing everybody start using the terminology coincidentally roughly at the same time.
Yeah, there's definitely signal chats out there with all of the operatives and media folks on the left getting their marching orders. There's no question about that. At the same time, I interviewed a member of the National Security Council under the Trump administration recently, and he told me that they took their marching orders from just public proclamations and public speeches. Even these are West Wing officials, as close to the president as you can possibly get, and yet they're taking their guidance off of public speeches. So, and I guess this is actually pretty typical stuff that takes place, at least in the United States government, that the president makes a speech and then all the agencies are like, oh, well, now we got to kind of do what the boss says there. So there is coordination, but there's also a terrifying lack of coordination. And what all this says to me is your analysis, my analysis, we're both right. When you put them together, it presents just an even more terrifying picture where the corruption is on every scale, whether it's your philosophy, your ideology, your practice, the way you decide you're going to break laws and commit crimes or frame people or dishonor honorable people or just be outright malicious or terrible. So, I waver sometimes between dumb and diabolical. That's like my favorite question about these things. Are they just stupid or are they evil? And it's a combination of both, I think. It's a combination of both.
It's the pursuit of power. You can call it evil, you can call it dumb or diabolical, but it's the bottom line. It's pursuit of power, preservation of power. And It's not just the institution. It's not just that corruption has been institutionalized. It's been normalized. And that is to me what the most dangerous part of all of this is the Governor Whitmer kidnapping case and whether or not it's entrapment. You have mainstream media turning entrapment into normal practice for the FBI now. They want to normalize the corruption so that people say, oh, okay, well, if that's what it takes to capture criminals, so be it. And we just have institutionalized, normalized corruption within the agencies where people say, yeah, well, I know Trump did something, so everything that they do is warranted, even if it's falsifying renewals of FISA warrants. But no, it's deep and it's pervasive, but it's just about pursuit and preservation of power.
So you said something that was very striking earlier, Tim, which was I want to run for my country before I run from my country. And that sounds like the culmination of an analysis that I'm undertaking myself, which is the pain of not running greater than the pain of running? That's sort of my calculus, right? Like if I don't run and everything is miserable, can I live with that? Or am I compelled to actually undergo the misery of trying to be a politician, to run a campaign, to work those schedules, and to do all the nuts and bolts and dirty, greasy, disgusting parts of governmenting, if that's a verb, and politics and such? That in and of itself is a stressful, icky, kind of gross thing that you're kind of jumping into. So there is, you have to analyze whether your pain here is going to be greater than your pain there. And it sounds like you've made your decision.
And God forbid, if I get elected, then I got to go to the pain. Now I will have gone from the toxic environment of the practice of law to the absolute toxic environment of politics. The election cycle, I was going to say, it's only, I think they declared it was like 35 days here. So it's not like the pain that you have in the States. I can deal with a marathon. But no, it would be more the question of, if I decide that the country has left me and that they are okay with certain things being done to our kids, they're okay with curfews and lockdowns as a form of governance. Well, if that's the way the country goes, the country has left me, and I haven't left my country. And I'm to the extent another free country exists on this earth, that's the big question: is where do you go? Because doesn't seem to be much better anywhere else. But I think the guilt and the shame of having fled before having tried to make a difference would be what would haunt me. And ultimately, I think it would also discredit me as an individual, given my evolution. It's very, at some point, self-preservation will be the determinant factor. We're not quite there yet. I think we're at a point where even if I don't win, I can still make a difference, and I can still maybe bring back a certain element of normalcy to expectations of government and citizens. But at the end of the day, like if the country goes in a certain direction, I'm not going to stay at a job that I hate any more than I'm going to stay in a country that is implementing policies that I hate. And we've gotten there. The only question is, can we bring it back a notch, if not entirely?
Yeah. Are you running on, well, first of all, I'd like to know what your main issues are. And then I'd also like to know whether you're running on the things that you believe in, or are you running on the things that your constituents believe in?
So that's a good question. I haven't actually thought about the second part of that. I'm running with the People's Party of Canada, so it's called the PPC. It was created by an individual, Maxime Bernier, who broke off from the Conservative Party after he either lost or was screwed out of the leadership of the party for someone who didn't subsequently do a very good job with the party. He started his own party. It's called conservative. It's called right. As far as I'm concerned, I don't know what conservative means anymore. They believe in constitutional values, constitutional rights. They believe in, as far as current realities go, no lockdowns, no vaccine passports, no curfews, no business shutdowns. You have to manage a crisis while respecting civil rights. On more broader non-pandemic issues, tighter immigration. You don't use immigration as a substitute for cheap labor. Canada first. Take care of your Canadian citizens, your Canadian residents. Take care of your marginalized groups before you start bringing in more people. Responsible parental stuff, like if you cannot afford more kids, don't have more kids. If you don't have enough to feed your current kids, don't have more kids. And what else? Smaller government. It's logical stuff. I haven't actually seen any policy that they espouse that I actually disagree with. And when it comes to certain core, certain litmus test questions for some, but other questions of conscience for others, abortion being the big one, they defer to your choice of conscience. They don't impose their views, nor do they on others. When it becomes maybe a legislative issue, it'll be a discussion. But they respect questions of choice of conscience, or what is it? Questions of conscience. But as far as what we're doing here, when I did a live stream with Maxime, and it became clear that I was ideologically aligned with the party, because I could not understand how what has become justifiable or normalized tools of government in any normal time would be objective tools of oppression. Lockdowns, curfews, detention of individuals against their will because you suspect, not even because you suspect they're sick, because risk, forcible confinement in a government quarantine hotel. That's the party. Now, am I running on things that I believe in or my constituents? I've always said, regardless of, there will always be constituents with whom I'm going to disagree, and I'm going to have to represent them regardless if I get elected, and represent them, listen to them, and respect their opinions. I would say, though, that I'm running on my own beliefs, which are similar to the party beliefs, because I'm in a liberal district. They probably, a lot of people here might support lockdowns. They might support vaccine passports. I don't. And if they don't like what I think, they won't elect me. And if they do like what I think, enough of them, they do elect me, I will represent everyone, and I will respect and try to work around the interests of those who think differently than me.
Are there debates and other official events and things that you have been included in? Are you being excluded from them? Are they giving you your due as a fair and legitimate candidate?
No, they are. This is another thing of the systematic corruption. The PPC is being systematically excluded, not just from the federal debates, the leaders' debates, from all, not all, a lot of local debates. The scandal that happened in Canada, I did a video on it, is that Maxime Bernier, the leader of the PPC, was not invited to the federal leaders debate. It's put on by the Leaders Debates Commission, a federal entity. So lo and behold, financed by the current government, they might have vested interests in certain outcomes. They have a formula, and listen to this, you'll see if you can digest this. They have a formula to determine who gets invited to the debate. And it means that any party polling at over 4% nationally, based on the average of a handful of selected reputable pollsters for the period of, it's either 5 days or 9 days before to 5 days after the writ is issued for the election. If you're polling at over 4%, you get invited. For anybody who has ever worked with statistics or pollsters, that is drafted and worded in such a way to yield whatever results you want. Because within the 9 polls that they chose, they had 15 polls. They disregarded 6 because they didn't fit their methodology, or they didn't like the methodology. They chose 9. Within the 9, the variance of the polls was something like 700%. One poll had the party at under 1%, like 0.2% in the national polling. Another one had them over 5%. And the party itself had 1.6% of the vote in 2018 or 2019. So, it got to the point where, okay, they were at 3.2%, below 4%, so Maxime's not invited. screw it, liars figure and figures lie, and we all know that. Three types of lies, damn lies, and statistics. And the way that's done is strictly to yield a result that you want, because they could have averaged it up to get Maxime in. Locally, they're excluding the candidates on any number of reasons. For whatever the reason, some local debates organized by community centers are adopting the federal criteria, as if that's relevant. But now the PPC is polling well over 5%, some even have them close to 10. So what do other organizations do? They say, oh, well, you have no seats in the House, so we're not inviting you because you don't have a current seat in Parliament, despite the fact that the PPC has candidates in 312 of the 338 ridings. Other local districts are saying you're not vaccinated, you can't be invited. And others are saying, they'll find any reasons to not get the PPC in. And despite all of that, despite the media blackout, despite the active political suppression, the party just keeps growing. But it's chicanery through and through.
How are you reaching the people? What are you doing? You going out there? You knocking on doors? You shaking hands? You coughing your Corona snot all over people? What's going on?
No more shake. I'm shaking hands. I've gone back to shaking hands with anybody who's brave enough to do it. I don't touch my face afterwards, but I didn't do that before Corona. I went door to door to get my signatures. I went to easily 200 houses. I've been going door to door, slipping flyers through mailboxes. I've been putting out videos, talking to people on the street, targeted ads on YouTube for the district, videos that reach the country, that normalize the PPC, so that people who read in the CBC that we're a bunch of racist, anti-immigrant xenophobes can actually understand who we are and what we are. Everybody who thinks they know the PPC says, oh, you guys are that extreme right anti-vax group. And I was like, no, we're not. That's a question of conscience. The leader is neither pro nor anti-vax, just pro-choice and anti-vaccine passports. But I've been going around everywhere, and I'm going to shame some of the debate people into inviting us, and if they don't, we're going to make more of a social media splash by the exclusion than we would have with the inclusion.
Indeed. So that is kind of where I was getting at. You have a secret weapon here. You have your media apparatus, and you do better views than MSNBC.
It's even on the second. I've created a Viva PPC channel, which is specifically for messaging for the political stuff, because I don't want the main channel to turn into political messaging. But they want to shut us out. Good. I put out a vlog breaking down Justin Trudeau's second ethics violation. It got 100,000 views. I mean, that's CBC level stuff in terms of viewership, and it gets shared and it gets liked above all else. CBC, sometimes they get a lot of views and they get ratioed in the thumbs down, and they get ratioed in the comments to the point where they disable comments. I'm reaching people with the truth, not necessarily even political messaging, just truth, or at least what I think is the truth. Right. Working social media is it's again another skill that I've acquired over the last 5 years. I had no idea I would be using that muscle in this leg of the decathlon, but I am, and it's proven to be very useful.
I remember when Brett Weinstein was trying to put together his dark horse candidate duo in the United States, and we talked on the phone, and he asked me who I thought should run. I gave him a couple names. But the number one thing I told him was that any candidate you pick has to be networked. And by that, I mean, you have to bring your own social media army to this battle. You can't come at it if you're going to be an outsider, if you're going to affect any kind of change that any of us are interested in, then you can't go through the normal apparatus. And you have to bring your big brother, your big cousin, whatever, this big stick that you have, which is, if you don't include me on this local thing that's only going to really get 15,000 views, boss, we're going to do this other thing where we're going to get 150,000 and we're going to send it all over the world. And that's a pressure. That's a pressure that you have as an advantage. Do any of your other candidates have similar social media profile?
Not that I know of. I mean, Maxime Bernier's got a big following, but the funny thing is some of them are going to grow their following now exponentially because people are going to discover them. It is, I've called it the political Streisand effect. It only works, suppression only works so well, and it really only works locally. Because you can bring that suppression to not to the national level, but make it more public, and then people learn, and then people start saying, well, why are they suppressing? And they start looking into it. So you can only get away with it for so long. But the interesting thing is, like, my Twitter feed, my Twitter following it was always modest, but now it's gotten bigger, not because I've been using my social media prowess to get it to go bigger. as you just be authentic with what you're expressing and genuine and above all else honest, it'll grow naturally. Even if it niche down into politics, it'll grow. But the amazing thing is that they think they can suppress, and when they can't, then then you start seeing other measures. Like at the government level here, we had this bill that the Liberal government was putting in called Bill C-10, and that sought to regulate the internet the same way they already regulate television and radio, to create certain requirements for Canadian content programming, to pay certain fees, penalties, yada, yada. And they wanted to impose it on the internet. And at first they said, well, we don't want to target individual creators. It's just about, sort of the broadcasters, Netflix and Hulu, maybe, I don't know, the other ones. And then it became clear they did want to include the content creators because they had an exclusion in the law specifically stating this will not apply to independent content creators. And then they took that exclusion out. And then in further explanations, they say, well, if the content creator is acting like a broadcaster, then sure, they should be subjected to these requirements. And you just see how the institutionalized corruption creeps down once they see that people are getting traction and a voice in the wild west of the internet. They say, we got to find a way to suppress those voices that are getting more traction than our state-sponsored media because we want to control the narrative and control the information. So life finds a way, as does truth.
Did that pass? How does that even work? If you're an individual content creator and you have a channel and you're Canadian, isn't all of your content then Canadian? Like, I mean, I don't understand.
It's a good question. And there was no criteria, no threshold. You had the Ministère Guilbeault, the Minister of Heritage, Stephen Guilbeault, saying, we don't have, and the way he speaks publicly does not make me feel good. But he gets out there saying, well, if you're a creator and you're acting like a publisher, I was like, what does that mean? How many views does it have to have? It says if you're making money off of it. Oh, so that applies to any content creator making money is now going to be governed by the Broadcasting Act. I mean, a lot of us out here genuinely got the feeling, and probably accurately so, that this law, Bill C-10, could have just been called the Rebel News Bill, because it looked like it was only an attempt to suppress and penalize Rebel News, which has, I don't know if they have more viewers because the state-sponsored media tends to have a lot of viewers, but not a lot of views. They reach millions of people a month. It was, in a lot of people's mind, clearly an attempt to stifle and suppress the independent media that is thriving on social media and the internet. But it didn't pass ultimately because it got held up at the Senate. Then they called the election, which basically means that any bill that did not get passed is a dead bill, and it'll be up for the next government to bring it back up if they want to. And then you realize, like, when it comes to the Conservative Party, the leader, Aaron O'Toole, is at first talking about how, if elected, they're going to repeal Bill C-10. I was like, that's great opposition, Aaron, on Twitter. I was like, how about you just fight the passing of the bill instead of promising to repeal it if and when you get elected? Because Lord knows, once any government tastes power, they don't exactly like to give it up, even if they call themselves conservative. But luckily it didn't pass. We'll see what minority government comes out of the next election, and then whether or not this law ever sees the light of day again.
I should hope not. Folks in America, I don't know if you realize this, but like if you're a Canadian radio station, you have to play X amount of like Canadian songs. Crazy.
Yeah, and they don't even know how they establish the criteria, because some totally Canadian content is not deemed to be Canadian content, and then other stuff that's totally not Canadian is deemed to be Canadian. And then you got the CBC running Associated Press articles, stories. It doesn't make sense. The only thing that makes sense about it is it allows for the imposition of fines, and it allows for basically the empowerment of the established legacy media. I mean, that's the bottom line to it.
You know, for as related as we are with Canadians, American, United Statesians, in Spanish they have a great word for that. It's estadounidense. It's an actual word that means like American citizen. You know, where you say Americans, that doesn't fit. For the estadounidenses here, for us, I'm always shocked at how similar we appear to be to Australia, Canada, and England, but like how different things are in the United States, and we think it's bad here in the US, but it is worse in Canada. It is way worse in Australia. It is worse in England. And I
don't think anything's worse in Australia and New Zealand at this point. England, there's some pushback. Europeans tend to push back, but yeah, everyone in America, this has been one of my biggest learning curves. You value freedom the way freedom is supposed to be valued in the States. We value security the way people value security at the expense of freedom.
The content laws were meant to prevent Canada from being overwhelmed by American culture. Isn't that right?
I mean, in theory, yeah, but it's supposed to be good for the economy, like, make companies that want to come shoot a film up here pay certain fees. I mean, yeah, everything, it was intended to preserve Canadian culture. That's what it was intended to do. What it ended up doing is creating an amazingly big government bureaucracy, as it all does, and it increases the cost of doing business, and it actually, in my humble opinion, actually harms Canadian culture and the preservation of it, because you can't, in as much as people try, you cannot preserve culture through laws. And we try it in Quebec with our Bill 101. I should say, it's very difficult to preserve culture through laws. It has to be preserved through identity, and you cannot create a national identity through laws. But what you can do is create a big government bureaucracy, control the media, make it very difficult to do business in Canada, which deters people from shooting content in Canada, and to the detriment of Canada, but to the benefit of the government, so I guess.
I was going to ask you a question about the public square, which I might get back to in a second, but you said this Canadian identity. What do you think the Canadian identity is?
It's not much different than the American identity. It is it's a love for freedom, and it's a love for individualism, with certain exceptions. I mean, it is a question of being polite and looking out for each other and community, but it is fundamentally about respecting the most core values of humanity: freedom of speech, freedom of choice, individual freedoms, because you cannot have social cohesion if you don't have individual freedoms. But what is Canadian? Yeah, love of nature, the respect for nature, the love of your fellow citizens, and the respect of your fellow citizens, which means the respect of their individual choices, and above all else, the respect of the core constitutional values on which Britain, Canada, America were founded. And there's a reason why we have a constitution, and we have the same values in our constitution between Canada and the US. We just don't have the same respect for those constitutional values. You guys, for good or for bad, depending on who you ask, will defend to the death your First and Second Amendments. In Canada, we have a freedom of speech with a big but, and we have freedom of liberty and association with a big but. We have a freedom of mobility with a big but, meaning all of your rights can be infringed upon in as much as justifiable in a free and democratic society. And that has led us to what we have now, which apparently in a free and democratic society, you can be locked in your house after 8 o'clock at night to combat a virus, despite any evidence supporting the measure. And that's a justifiable infringement of our fundamental rights. So we have them here. We just don't respect them as much as you guys do.
Well, unfortunately, I feel like that respect for those inherent rights, the constitutional rights, natural rights given to us by our Creator, as expressly stated in the Declaration of Independence, I have a feeling that we're going to lose some of those today. I don't know what time the press conference is or when the announcement is, but Biden, they've been teasing. We're going to have a big impact. We're going to tell you about the big changes. Are they going to impact your day-to-day life? Well, if you're unvaccinated, they are. We've already seen the first volley come out, which is that all federal government employees and all federal contractors and their employees are now going to be required to be vaccinated. A big question will be whether or not that extends to recipients of federal grants, because, of course, that involves every person in education from K all the way through graduate schools and all the universities, except for, I think, Hillsdale might be the only school out there that in Liberty that aren't taking any federal funds. So we're about ready to see what kind of freedoms we have. I suspect that they may also try to impose a no vax, no fly list. That seems to be a lever that they could pull. And if they don't actually pull that lever, then none of this other stuff makes any sense. Because I am not how far do we want to go into this? Let me just put it this way. If you're in a workspace and you need a vaccine, it seems to me that you would need a vaccine in a plane. So if you don't do both, the logic isn't there. And the absence of the logic is always the biggest issue that I have with all of these things, is that there's no logic. What is your internal logic in these statements that you're making? There's none. Ugh.
Oh, Jack, you want to hear the epitome of absence of logic. So we've put in the vaccine. The government has, like a true dictator, imposed the vaccine passport in the absence of public debate and the absence of scientific justification. They've done it for restaurants. So you have to be fully vaccinated, download the QR code so that you can be scanned or show your papers when you enter a restaurant. The employees of the restaurant do not yet have to be fully vaccinated. So you're listening to people justify this, as far as I'm concerned, wholly unscientific measure to say, I'm entitled to know if I'm going to be at risk if I'm fully vaccinated, sitting in the same establishment as someone who might not be vaccinated. And so therefore it's justifiable. But meanwhile, the employees don't have to be vaccinated. And so you just see where it all goes from here. And we're actually seeing it in more real time, where the government says it's only going to apply to non-essential services. And I have a degree in philosophy and I took a few classes in logic. You don't need to be a trained logician to say, okay, well, if the risk is so great and so serious that it requires this level of infringement of constitutional rights for non-essential services, shouldn't it be all the more true of essential services? And then are you not just getting into a situation where you're going to say, no vax, no healthcare, no vax, no essential services? And I mean, it's only a matter of time. And we're already sort of seeing it to some extent, but it's like, it's the absence of logic, but above all else, it's just the absence of scientific evidence and public debate. We're 2 years into an emergency. If you don't have time to pass this through the legislative branch, your government is the problem, not your emergency.
Right? I mean, that was one of the justifications I saw for some of this, which was the inefficiency of the federal government requires the executive branch to take these actions.
It's like incompetence. You don't get a raise when you're incompetent. You get fired. Yeah. And now they're saying, we're in an emergency. We've been in an emergency for a year and a half. We haven't been able to pass a law, to have a debate, to have to go through the democratic process. I tell you, the government should be all fired and replaced with competence that will manage a crisis while respecting fundamental rights. But no, you're right. It's like, we're slow, we're incompetent, we can't handle it. Our healthcare system is overrun. So what do? You, the citizens, have to bear the brunt of our incompetence.
I have zero faith that this idea, this energy that you've got here will be able, not your candidacy, but just in general, will be able to just fire people for being incompetent, change the whole nature of industrial organization. I just don't know that is in the cards. And like, I have experience working in government. I have experience in working in nonprofits and the private sector. I have studied industrial organization. I've studied the way organizations behave, how they exist and persist over time, how they manage their budgets and protect their funding and forget about their mission and only focus on survival. And that's all happening. And no one's ever written a book about like, well, how do you get rid of that? Usually the answer to get rid of that is more government regulation if it's not the government side of it. But one of the things I'm struck by, and I want to tie this into your personal story a little bit, is, my book was called Democrat to Deplorable. I was definitely a Democrat. I voted for Obama in 2008. I voted for Bill Clinton. I thought being a Democrat was the only sane, smart place to be. I thought it was the only compassionate place to be. And my whole world has changed over the last 10 years on this. And what I've come to understand is that I had principles then that are the same principles that I have now. And so every position that I have or interest that I take, it's based on these principles with logic that carry them out. And you can just take that same set of principles and apply it to each new novel circumstance, and you get a sort of similar policy prescription. The Democrats don't seem to have any in America, don't seem to have any in the United States, don't seem to have any moral anchoring or logical anchoring or principle anchoring, which allows them sort of careen wildly to the left. How did your transformation happen? I mean, would you always considered yourself to be conservative-ish or whatever we are on the right or whatever this is? Or
I still don't consider myself to be, I don't call myself conservative because I believe in things which are traditionally liberal things. I believe in things which may be traditional conservative things. I don't know what to call myself, but it's a very funny thing. Your observation is, I don't like to make the sweeping generalizations of political individuals, but as a party, you're talking about no principles and it allows for endless evolution or regression. I put together just a short montage of our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau. I think it was 6 months ago when he had facial hair, giving a speech, and he says, what about people talking about vaccination? He says, what about people with medical conditions, people with allergies, people with deep religious convictions that don't want to get vaccinated? We're not the type of country that makes vaccinations mandatory. 6 months later, he's running an election ad it starts off with verbatim, I believe vaccinations should be mandatory for airline and train travel. And I juxtapose the two same statements coming out of the same individual. Maybe when he shaved his beard, something clicked inside. He says, on the one hand, 6 months ago, we're not a country that makes vaccines mandatory. 6 months later, I believe vaccines should be mandatory. And it's like, with the caveat that it's for trains and planes, but that's a distinction without a difference as far as I'm concerned. I don't know if it's a political phenomenon, but at the very least, with this individual, with Aaron O'Toole, who now comes out in support of vaccine passports, there is no, you're right, core principle that doesn't change over time. You don't get to do evil things just because it's for the greater good. My thesis in philosophy, I coined it. It was called deontological consequentialism, where consequentialism is the idea that you can do whatever you want if it maximizes the good. So I don't want to use any really bad examples because I don't want to run afoul of YouTube, but end one young person's life if it saves 10 people. And I'll say, so that's the consequentialist way of looking at it. If you kill one to save 10, it can be justified. And I said, no, you have to have a form of deontology behind your consequentialism in order for it to mean anything, because if you're not maximizing anything by committing evil. And so you have to maximize the good in order to preserve the good. And so it's consequentialism, but for deontological purposes. But it seems like our politicians, there's no core principle. It's just either whatever good to get elected, or whatever they feel that day. And some people say it's evolution. I'll say when you basically come back on diametrically opposed positions, it's not evolution. It's just outright hypocrisy. Yeah. And I know where we see it a lot more in my view, but we're seeing it from the conservatives just as much. So I don't think it's politically aligned. I think it's just maybe a sign of the times.
Could you please define deontological for some of our listeners? I mean, typically my channel is deep dive, academic dive, professors and PhDs, and we read their books and we dig in. So this question is not out of field for what we're doing here. Can you explain what you mean by that, please?
And I hope it's accurate, but deontological meaning like certain core fundamental ethical principles that you cannot violate. So you have Kant, it was Kant's categorical imperatives. Like, you can never lie. So, if the Nazis are coming and say, do you have someone here? You have to tell the truth because lying is a categorical imperative. Well, I think most of us would disagree with that. Then others would disagree. Like, terrorist says, you kill that one person or I'm going to blow up a plane, and say, well, I'm going to save 150 people by committing an atrocity myself, but only on one person. So that's consequentialism, or maybe it's not utilitarianism, it's consequentialism. So deontology is the idea being you maximize the ethical good, but it's a complicated formula. So they talk about deontology as sort of like moral principles or imperatives, and then you talk about utilitarianism or consequentialism, which is more of a matter of fact and not a matter of ethics. I hope that sounds about right.
Yeah, no, that definitely helps. And it's interesting to examine all of the sort of surface political goings-ons, and then trying to sort of back into what the core philosophical or political philosophical position is. And that is what I'm at. There's no grabbing onto that for me looking at people on the left. It's all relativism, it's all historicism, it's all progressivism, it's all there's no real history, there's no real truth to men, there's only truth to mankind, there's only truth to each man in each era, and nothing is universal. And I have spent a lot of time studying now ancient texts, the founding texts, and like trying to understand where people's philosophies have been throughout time, and just trying to come down to like a core political philosophy that is going to be the best for everybody, or at least just have a freaking political philosophy. There's no political philosophy on the left.
No, there isn't. And especially, from the progressive side, I mean, the best example, I guess, that would illustrate it is the debate on transgender athletes, where one has to appreciate that they once upon a time created the distinction between male and female, XY and XX sports, because there were biological differences that created a situation where women can compete with men in men's sports. So you create this distinction in order to preserve and protect the rights of women. And then that was the principle. That would be like sort of the rule that we all deserve equal rights. And when there's certain biological factors that create a non-competitive playing field, you create a division to protect the rights of those respective playing fields. Then you get into the progressivism of saying, and again, it's not a question of saying that transgender individuals should be denied rights where biology is irrelevant. That is no one that I know, no one in my sphere and myself in particular espouse that belief. Where there are no biological differences that could account for the discrimination, then there shouldn't be. I mean, that was the reason why you have different gender sports. But then you get into this progressivism where you say, well, now in order to be so tolerant, we have to ignore certain biological factors which were the root of previous laws to create equality, and in so doing you actually create inequality for the group that you had hitherto sought equality for. And that's where, when you have an evolution without core principles, it turns into something of a regression where you are in fact implementing policies in the name of equality that are creating an injustice that you had historically sought to overcome. And I guess that's a concrete example of how anchorless progressivism that doesn't respect the actual fundamental underlying reasons for the initial protection in the first place creates an injustice.
Yeah. Well, any philosophy that is like 100% focused on, like, we can reduce risk to zero, we can reduce evil in the world to zero, we can reduce all bad things to zero, we can make humans perfect, we can just use science and technology and technocracy and specialists and experts. All we have to do is just expert harder, guys. We just have to expert harder. We just have the scientific method harder to make everything perfect in this world and to protect, to make everything perfect in this world and to reduce all the evil down to zero. This is at the core of the COVID zero philosophy, right? Which is that we can.
And had anyone tried to sell us on COVID zero from day one, and no one would have gotten on board because it's impossible. We know it's impossible. And you're not going to get to COVID zero. You're not going to get to any virus zero. At some point, it becomes a question of management, which some states, some provinces, some countries appreciate. Others don't, for whatever the reason.
I wish that they would have come out and said 15 days to COVID zero. It's the moving goalposts, man. It's the moving goalposts that make it impossible. And the reason they have to move the goalposts is because zero is, you can never get there.
And imagine where we are now. Now it's gone to, we've have a population which it's over 70%, if not over 80, double vaccinated. It's like over 90, depending on your demographic. Over 70 years in Canada, 95+% vaccination rate. We've achieved every goal they've ever said, and it's only now they come in with a vaccine passport to try to demonize and blame everything on the minority that's not vaccinated. And the numbers are where they are. And like at some point you realize, like, I've said this before, but COVID has become an industry for the government, and they're going to keep it going because can you imagine, like 2 years ago, the government did something else other than manage a virus, and now it's the be all and end all of the existence of the government, and it's given them unprecedented powers. And we've respected, we've adhered to every measure that they've put along the way. And as the more you get down the line, the more it gets extreme, and not vice versa. But that is government nature. They will never relinquish a power that they've usurped, and people don't really realize that. And then you just get into the situation where people have lost so much. They say, "Oh, it's for the greater good. I lost all my money at the casino, but at least it's going to go to tax dollars and support a local community."
Well, in the United States, the government, at least here, has two functions. One is to strive for COVID zero, and the other is to kill all white people. So that is well, where we are.
I don't know about part two of that. We in Canada, I don't think we have quite the same racial debates of the same discussion, although our leaders are trying their very best to create the social divide based on race and ethnicity in Canada.
That's a great way of saying it. Trying their very best to create racial divides and hysteria in the society, where as a child of the 90s, I'm a Gen Xer, born in the 70s, grew up in the 90s, the heyday of America, it felt like. Pax Americana, we were cashing the peace dividend, we had budget surpluses, We were reducing taxes. We were getting people off of welfare. We didn't have any wars. We didn't have the Cold War. And we had DMX at Woodstock 1999 leading 100,000 white kids in a rendition of N-word, N-word, N-word 50 million times over and over again. And if you're Gen X and you have a sense that we peaked in our racial harmony and it's been downhill since we came of age, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely 100% right. And anybody that's telling you guys out there that like all this racial animosity and tension that's out there in the world, that like it was there 20 years ago, it wasn't. It wasn't. It just wasn't.
And I've seen it in my own life. I mean, it's I think it really culminated with Trudeau, just endless talking about race, religion, ethnicity. He looks at an individual. He doesn't see an individual. He just sees a checkbox of identity politics to be satisfied or to be exploited for political purposes. And what it does in society, it becomes reflexive for everyone to say, did what just happen to me because I'm Jewish or I'm Black or I'm Asian or I'm Indigenous? Did what just happen to me on an individual basis or based on identity politics? It causes everyone to look at each other with that sort of identity politics stink eye. You look for explanations that are not there, and just by needling that and creating the scratch and picking at the scab, you cause a massive infection that was never there in the first place. And I've seen it in real time since he's had the podium that he's had.
Disgusting. I have another topic I want to get to. First, I want to shout out Jumpin' Jeff in the super chats. Thank you very much for that. And guys, if you have a question for Viva, drop it in here. We'll do super chat questions if we get any good ones. You do on your channel analysis of legal cases, and you have done an analysis of a legal case involving somebody that I am very good friends and associates with. His name is Mr. Timothy Poole. And I am a regular co-host on the Tim Pool Timcast IRL. I'm on every other Wednesday. My next appearance will be on September 15th. Please check it out. And you recently did a breakdown of a lawsuit that's facing Tim. And I was wondering if you could give us a little bit of a synopsis on that, because I hear bits and pieces and ins and outs, and this is a little bit of gossip and stuff, but it's interesting and it's relevant. And I know a lot of my guys follow along with Tim too, so this is relevant to our interests, sir. Let's talk. I mean, say from an outside perspective, it's fun to read. Knowing what goes on behind the scenes on an individual level, I know the stress and the pain in the ass financially and spiritually and emotionally that this causes. But bottom line, Tim created a new company called Subverse Inc., which was supposed to be an alternative media site. You have your team, you bring in the people you think are going to work well. He was the majority shareholder with, I forget the other person's name, but Emily Molly was a 5% shareholder. Tim was 85, and who was the other person? 10% shareholder. No, not Marco. It was not Rocco. Rocco was never a shareholder. Okay. But bottom line, they start a new company. Things always go well until they don't go well. The company raised over $1 million crowdfunding to fund their business. You have a falling out with Emily Molly, who's a 5% shareholder and I believe a director, and Rocco Castoro, who is not a shareholder. But bottom line, allegedly, they were disseminating information which was both potentially confidential and potentially defamatory. They were told to stop. Poo-poo hits the fan. There's a falling out corporate-wise, what we like to call a corporate divorce gone wrong. And Tim Poole convenes a meeting among the directors to deal with the issue and address the Emily Molly issue. Emily Molly does not attend the meeting in protest by her own admission, by their own documents, then convenes her own directors meeting with Rocco, who's neither a shareholder and arguably not a director either, during which they vote out Tim Poole as CEO of the company. So the corporate chicanery, for anybody who has even seen an episode of Suits, that would know you can't do these types of things. They documented their directors meeting in a way that provides all the evidence the Subverse as a company would ever need to show the chicanery. They apparently misappropriated some of the assets that were bought with the monies that they raised, serious video editing stuff.
So it's a standard shareholder corporate dispute lawsuit. Shareholders, directors not doing what they're supposed to do. They don't want to leave the company. They try to, do all sorts of fun stuff. Where it got really interesting is that they filed their own defense. So they're pro se litigants, self-represented. And I don't know if they're getting advice. It doesn't look like they're getting any legal advice. And they filed a defense, both of them. 2 documents. I don't know why. There might have been a good reason. There might have been a bad reason. But they filed 2 documents in their defense, which are, look, I've said it before, you can have very good pro se litigants, people who are capable, intelligent, and able to dissociate themselves from their conflict. It's the toughest thing is to be objective when you're the one who's at issue. Some people can do it well, other people can't. This defense was a dog's breakfast if I've ever seen it. It's made admissions that are going to be held against them. It contradicted statements they've already made in other exhibits. And it's going to be just a mess for a judge to deal with if and when. But their bottom line of the defense, some of it's typical. We wanted to give back the assets that we are alleged to have misappropriated, so we just couldn't do it. They had no business kicking us out of the company. It was a punishment for blowing a whistle because they alleged they outed some wrongdoing from Tim Pool and the company. Typical defense stuff, but my goodness, you read it and you realize why some people need lawyers, but then you also realize why some people cannot retain lawyers, because some pro se litigants are pro se because they want to save money. They can do it on their own. Others are pro se because they cannot maintain a relationship with a lawyer because they are too wild card of clients. They lose their lawyers systematically and they end up representing themselves out of necessity.
Pro se litigation is a fascinating field. I have represented myself pro se a number of times actually. And that was after I had hired lawyers a bunch. In real estate, we hired a bunch of lawyers. Nonprofit world, we hired a bunch of lawyers. Government, we hired a bunch of lawyers. And I can tell you that one of the reasons that I did pro se myself was specifically to avoid the pressure of lawyer fees, right? Like a lot of times lawsuits will be brought where people will be counting on the fact that you don't want to spend the money to even defend yourself and rather write a check to a lawyer for 50 grand to get to some conclusion. You might as well just write a check for 25 grand to this guy over here who filed a lawsuit against you. And I got tired of frivolous stuff like that. And so I decided to represent myself. And you get advice, if you're a good person and you have a network like we talked about, you can get advice that's not legal advice from people behind the scenes. And then you just kind of do it yourself. And as a pro se litigant, you have a little bit more leeway with the court. You don't have to be as official or have all of your I's dotted and T's crossed. And it's an interesting experience that I don't necessarily recommend to anybody else out there, especially if you've never done it before. This is not legal advice. Please don't go out there running around filing lawsuits or defending yourself pro se if you're not experienced, yada, 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 et cetera, and so forth. But the reason I wanted to bring this up is because in the context of Tim Pool, myself, media, YouTube, government, Wikipedia, the American Defamation League, frivolous lawsuits, all these things work together. So if anybody noticed, there was a big Daily Beast article that came out on Tim Pool probably a month or two ago or so, 8,000 words, just outlining all the reasons why Tim Pool is a horrible, terrible person, using all these unnamed sources over and over again, unnamed sources cited in articles that they linked to Daily Beast where there's other unnamed sources in there. I'm pretty sure that these people behind this lawsuit here or involved in this lawsuit are the same people that pushed all this information to this Daily Beast guy. Now, I'm going to tie it into another guest that I've had on. I had on the founder of Wikipedia, okay? And the founder of Wikipedia told me that the Daily Beast is considered to be a reliable source for Wikipedia, whereas other outlets that you may be more familiar with, like the Washington Examiner and others like that, a little bit more right of center, not allowed as viable sources to post on Wikipedia to make a Wikipedia article. So why did this Daily Beast article come out around the same time? Because the Daily Beast guy is working together with these other knuckleheads, I'm speculating now, to put into circulation these allegations about Tim based on unnamed sources that get cited and recited within the Daily Beast, that then get put into a Wikipedia page that the American Defamation League and others who are partnered with Google and YouTube and all these other companies use their hit list as targets to shut down folks on social media. And the ADL uses Wikipedia and Wikipedia uses Daily Beast. And the Daily Beast uses unnamed sources in articles that they cite of the Daily Beast with unnamed sources that go all the way back to people like these knuckleheads over here that allegedly, theoretically, possibly stole a bunch of money and equipment from my buddy Tim, tried to fuck him over. And now they're running this whole thing, trying to use the way that this ecosystem has developed. Unnamed sources, cited in Daily Beast, recited by Daily Beast, cited by Wikipedia, cited by ADL, pushed to the top of the list. Here you go, YouTube. These are the people you're supposed to ban. That's how it works, guys. And that's why I brought it up. I just wanted to throw that out there. Do you have any reaction or comment or additions to that?
It's the wrap-up smear that Nancy Pelosi described. I mean, it is how it works. You get one outlet to run an otherwise questionable story. It gets cited by another media outlet, and it creates its own vortex of fake news. As far as I'm concerned, I know you don't want to name your sources, but when an article is based only on anonymous sources, as with so much of the fake articles that came out about Trump, it's worth what it's worth. But it is 100% accurate that this is how, that's their network. That's their network of connections, and they just happen to control a certain meaningful part of the internet and the social and the digital world. But how many examples do we have to see of it? It's exactly how it worked. It was what the FBI did with the Trump PP story. You leak the story with an anonymous source. Yahoo runs it. You take it to court as an authority to justify what you're going after in court, knowing full well you're the one who planted it with the news in the first place, creating its own legitimacy of an otherwise totally fabricated story. So the Daily Beast article, I don't know it offhand, but undoubtedly anonymous sources, who cares who they are? Nobody's going to check. The Daily Beast is somewhat credible, but for anyone who knows better, is what it is, like all the rest of them. They run the story, others run the story, then all of a sudden you start Googling the keywords, and it's not just the Daily Beast anymore, it's all of the other ones running. What was the book called? Trust Me, I'm Lying, by Billie Holiday.
Yeah, Holiday. Yeah, excellent book.
You have to. Everyone has to read it. It is the ecosystem and how it works. And once you see it, then you get called crazy because you don't believe anything you read anymore. But once you see it and once you know how it works, it allows you to read and decipher through the crap with a little bit more of an astute eye.
Yeah. When they leak the PP story into the press and then the press cites it and then the government's like, oh, the press is talking about it. Now we need to investigate. And it creates this whole thing where there wasn't anything there in the first place. And, that was horrible. It's horrible to see for the country. It's horrible to see for politics. It's horrible to see for Trump and all of this. Seeing it happen in real time with my buddy Tim, having it happen to me as well, too. I had Think Progress write a hit piece about me, then it gets repeated by a bunch of these bullcrap repeater blogs that don't add any value. They just cite what they said. And then all of a sudden it's just on the 75,000 other blogs out there. And it's just a complete disaster. And I don't know how to resolve that fact. It is the ADL working with Google, relying on Wikipedia, combine that with, and this is how fast news is moving these days. The White House announced a couple of months ago that they had an office inside the White House that was reviewing Facebook content and creating a list of content and creators that they wanted not only Facebook to shut down, but then they would work together to bridge the gap. I love that phrase. To bridge the gap. That's supposed to exist, by the way. To bridge the gap between the government and all these various corporations and the other social media companies to make sure that the content that was flagged by the White House team told to Facebook to take down also gets taken down and banned across all social media platforms all at once. How is this not headline top of the fold, big, bold language?
How institutionalized and normalized corruption. Now that, when your adversary carries out or looks for opposition research, it's corruption, it's foreign interference. When your political ally does it, it's good politics. If the Trump administration were to have ever done anything remotely a fraction on this scale, it would have been tyrannical government working with the media to create a fascist state. When your government does it, when your ally does it, it's just good governance. It's just controlling information. It's just making sure that people don't take certain medications and then overdose and then go into a hospital and overload that hospital and then not leave beds for gunshot wounds. Another totally fake story run on a totally, well, he was an anonymous source, And thank goodness he wasn't anonymous, because people were able to call him out and saying, not even employed for the last 2 months, has no personal knowledge of what he's talking about. But damage is done. Stories out there, other outlets referred to that story, and they created their own fake news vortex.
Yeah. Once you start, Ryan Holiday, that's it. Once you start seeing, he's the author of Trust Me, I'm Lying. Everybody should read that book.
Amazing book.
He laid out the blueprint for all of this years ago. And it's definitely worth reading still to this day. Someone dropped in the chat there, Alogon. Yes, thank you. Marshall McLuhan also talked about the medium is the message. You should read that or watch the videos that he has put out. Was he Canadian? I think he was Canadian. A guy back in the 60s and 70s talking about how the technology is going to create all these very things that we're experiencing right now. Someone else in the chat dropped in, Yuri, I can't remember how to pronounce his last name, Yuri Brezmenov or something. But Yuri Bezmenov, he was the Russian defector who came here in the 60s and 70s and told us everything that the Russians were doing. He laid out the map of all the things that were going to happen, the propaganda, the social division, the misinformation, the demoralization.
And the time frame, how long it takes per stage. People have mentioned the name in my previous streams, and I don't put the name with the face, but I know it's an old video. Guy has glasses, gray hair, talking about exactly how it's done, and it's very prescient. I'm not sure if that's the right word. It's like Orwell was not predicting the future. Orwell was just reciting the past. This has always existed in one form or another. It's just that, it might be what has existed in the past when they were chiseling away, fake news on stones. But now with the digital world, it's just on steroids. But I suspect it's accelerating. It's always been this way in one form or another. Mark Twain's history doesn't repeat, but it tends to rhyme. I'm sure it's been like this in various forms throughout history. But my goodness, it happens faster now, and people can react on it faster now for good and for bad.
Acceleration. This is not something that we are confusing. This is not some dream. This is not some conspiracy. Like, events are accelerating, right? Like, these timelines are accelerating. The crises are accelerating. When in the 1700s, when they wanted to have a constitutional convention, you had to get on your horse and you had to ride for 2 weeks before you got to where you were going. And then you were there for 6 months and you sent everything took time. Nothing takes any time anymore, so everything is accelerating. You've got that sense too that this is like this thing is just when the drain starts to go and you're gonna get sucked out.
It's the roll of toilet paper. It goes faster towards the end, but is it accelerating? From 2 weeks to flatten the curve to vaccine passports and 13-year-old kids not being allowed to try out for soccer because they're not vaccinated for a virus which has whatever minimal risk for those kids, and we're accelerating fast and. Not in. I feel like it's maybe we've passed the event horizon of a black hole. I hope not, but that's sort of what it feels like. And listening to daytime radio in Quebec and Canada, I'll keep giving them a hard time. CJAD, the absolute purveyors of hate, sitting there having a call in. Should we make people who are COVID positive who didn't get vaccinated pay their own healthcare bills? Should we deny them a seat in a room in the hospital? And callers calling in saying, it's about time, they're never going to learn otherwise. And people are just jumping into the abyss without the second thought because they think they're safe today. And they have no idea that the world they're creating may be safe for you today, but it's safe for no one tomorrow.
Yeah, people that were otherwise normal, sane, seemingly rational, kind folks that you considered part of your friend network, in your family, in your community, have lost their freaking minds in the last 5 years and have become grotesque distortions of the people that I once thought that they were. And people ask, how did things happen in Germany? How does fascism happen? How did they kill all those people in Cambodia? It's like this, man. It's like 1 degree at a time. The pot is boiling. We don't even really realize it. Again, we go back to these internal logic. There's no internal logic in saying an obese person who's 600 pounds deserves medical care. Hold on.
Let the jokes in the chat start.
Right? An obese person who weighs 600 pounds deserves medical care. But a 20-year-old healthy person who doesn't get the vaccine, who gets sick, doesn't deserve health care.
Oh, and by the way, Jack, so I don't get canceled from social media. I meant the joke in the chat is going to be about you getting the coof, because whenever Barnes on my stream coughs, everyone goes straight for the Rona in the chat. No, well, so Jack, the logic to to steel man their logic, obesity is not contagious. Drunk driving is not contagious, although that can really impact other people as well. Breaking your arm skateboarding is not contagious. So no need to have the same requirement that they pay for their hospital bills because they did something stupid. All right, well, the logic or absence thereof in California, you're actually decriminalizing to some extent, knowingly exposing someone to HIV. That's contagious. Are we gonna impose these same ideas for not getting a flu vaccine? And if you get sick and you have asthma, you go to the hospital? I mean, they're just not thinking, because they think they're protected from their abuse, from their, what was the word you used? I want to say atrocious. They think they're protected from their own, whatever. They think they're protected today, but it's not contagious. Well, let's just apply it then to contagious viruses. So you don't get the flu vaccine. If you get sick and get hospitalized, you pay your own bills. If you don't get the flu vaccine and you get someone else sick with the flu and they end up in a hospital, you pay their bills. I mean, they're not thinking of the society they're creating. They're not thinking about the logic or even the risks at the end of the day. This is the problem, is that 2 years of day in and day out fear porn can wreak havoc on the most logical, the most sane people. Right. And we're seeing it in real time. People have no assessment of actual risk. To them, someone coughing outside on the street is as much of a risk to them as playing Russian roulette. That's where they're at mentally.
Our ability to think rationally has been diminished. It's very clear.
As it does in times of fear.
Yeah. And someone in the chat just mentioned the China PLA's unrestricted warfare doctrine, which is what I was referencing earlier when I said the Chinese are aware of the fact that the media is a weapon of war and that they're using it. And they're using it in the same way that Yuri Bezmenov, somebody helped me out with the pronunciation in the chat. Thank you very much for that, for that chat. It's demoralization. And you get demoralized to the point then where your risk analysis becomes totally skewed. And then people can just insert ideas into your brain that feel like something that you can latch onto. And so you latch onto them because you're scared. You're afraid. Now, the obesity thing is, this is something that I harp on quite a bit. There are negative externalities to obesity in America because of our health, the way our health system is set up. And it's obviously hereditary, it's socially hereditary and socially contagious. And it obviously has negative externalities and spillover effects on everyone in our country, driving up all of our healthcare prices. So there's your internal logic for you, folks. No, anyway,
contagion is not the only relevant factor. And what do you mean by contagion? It puts others at risk. Yeah, well then an obese person who's in the hospital puts someone else at risk who has a spontaneous heart attack. I mean, it's the arbitrary distinctions to arrive at the conclusion that you want. It's motivated reasoning. You want to get there. So find the slight distinction. Oh, and then how about the regular flu? Well, we're not in a pandemic. So because the government says we're in a pandemic, now I can apply a different criteria to communicable viruses. It's motivated reasoning.
It really is. And I think about it, and we're going to wrap up here in a second. I think about it. If Corona was polio, you can bet your ass that I would be first in line with my kids, giving them little sugar cubes and getting them shots immediately. People have no idea what that was like. Can't go to the pool today. People are catching polio and getting paralyzed and dying, kids. Oh, all right. Well, let's not go to the pool today. Is there a vaccine for that? Yes, let's take it now. Risk analysis. It's like one of these things that people need to be taught in school that no one is taught. But if your emotional state is not there, if you're not prepared to withstand the bombardment that we suffer in this deliberately polluted information space, then you're not going to survive. And this is going to be my little wrap up rant here. We've talked about institutions and networks. We've talked about having internal logic, having principles. We're talking about physical health here. You have to be physically fit in order to actively defend your own mind space from it being occupied by a mimetic virus that is trying to kill you. If you listen, this is how we started at the beginning. If you listen to the institutions today, you're fat, you're sick, you're in debt, you work for a corporation, you're chained to your desk. If you're in Canada, your kid's locked up in the basement in quarantine, and you're feeding them grilled cheese underneath the door. If you aren't physically fit and actively and spiritually fit and emotionally fit and integrated into a whole person, you are not going to be able to defend yourself from these ideas, the fear porn, the deliberate misinformation, the outside forces. The Russians and the Chinese are literally trying to sow discord in America, people. Literally, and have been for decades. This is not a conspiracy theory. It's out there. It's public. And in order to survive in this ever accelerating vortex, this is past the event horizon, perhaps, as you said, which is a terrifying thought. You have to take a whole new approach to life. Starts in the squat rack. It starts with your nutrition. Starts with your spiritual life. It starts with your friend network, your professional network, and integrating all these things into a new manner of living, which is what we're trying to do at the Liminal Order, liminal-order.com, all men's fraternity, 750 members all across the world. Take 50 new guys each month. So sign up and join the list first Monday of every month. David, these conversations that we're having right here, sir, are meant to help people prepare themselves and steel themselves and to be a combatant on this battlefield in which they chose not to be a participant. Marshall McLuhan, someone that we referenced earlier, has said very clearly that it will be no distinction, Chinese also in their total war approach, there will be no distinction between soldier and citizen. The battlefield is everywhere and anywhere at all times. We all have to internalize that and understand that so that we can defend against it to maintain our own personal liberty. David, you're doing that, buddy. I hope that you can continue in your campaign in Canada to win your seat. I'm sorry. I don't know why. I just can't stop saying that.
The election is on the 20th. It's going to be, it's the vote. The election is on the 20th. We may not know the results until after, but look, and Jack, I mean, I think it's a beautiful thing what you said. You have to be physically fit in order to be psychologically prepared. And it's, Aristotle's golden mean. I don't know who else said your body's a temple. When we see articles coming out of mainstream media that says healthy 16-year-old didn't get the vax, is in the hospital for double pneumonia, and then you see the picture of the child, unfortunately, morbidly obese, sleep apnea, mother's diabetic, and then you wonder how some people are more susceptible to negative reactions. What drives me crazy in all of this, the government has been pushing the wrong measures from the very beginning, has been exacerbating the problem instead of focusing on what would make everyone more well prepared. But yeah, healthy body, healthy mind, get the exercise, get outside, look at the horizon, and absorb some sunlight.
Beautiful. Well said. Thank you very much, sir. I've thoroughly enjoyed all of our interactions, even the one where you're giving me a hard time and grilling me. I appreciate that. I'm playing it.
Hold on, before we go. Say it again.
I said I'm playing it up. I'm playing it up, but go for it.
No, I thought we just went off air.
No.
I have to say, for that, Jack, I do the research on everybody, and I see what people's criticisms are of them. I listened to your book, and I think we're adults, and I knew that you could handle. They were, I wouldn't say adverse questions. They weren't hostile, but they were pointed questions. And it was my first interaction with Mike Cernovich as well, where I did it, and they're questions I feel I have to get out from my own conscience. I think people appreciate the answers, and I think people appreciate your ability to field questions that that are direct questions. But I have also appreciated that there's only so many times anybody can and should be expected to apologize, if they should be expected to apologize at all. I learned that with Mike and with you. It was great. I just didn't want anyone actually thinking there were any hard feelings out there between me and you whatsoever.
None.
You're an adult. You can deal with it, as can I. And it was great meeting you, and it was fortuitous, and I'm glad we did this.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, this is what I want people to really understand. Your pointed questions of me built a reservoir of respect and interest and intrigue that I wanted to learn more about you, because you asked very good questions, and you were pointed, and you were fearless, and you dug down and you drilled down, and you're like, well, what about this? I'm like, sweet, let's go. I love it. I appreciated that. And it's a great example for people out there, especially the way men interact in particular, where if you can challenge someone in a respectful way, you can establish the nature of your relationship and the dynamic in your relationship, and you can appreciate it. And a challenge can be appreciated and can become the foundation for a friendship, which I think is what is happening here, sir. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Jack. It's great.
Tell everybody where they can find you, David.
Oh, so Twitter, if you want to see Angry Viva, at the Viva Fry. YouTube is for the good law stuff, Viva Fry. There's Viva Family, which is random stuff. Political YouTube is Viva PPC. And that's it. Instagram and whatever. But YouTube and Twitter is where I get most of the messaging across now.
Fantastic. I appreciate that. Everybody follow him out there. If you're in Canada, in his district, vote for him. If you're not, tell your friends and neighbors and cousins and sisters and everybody else to vote for him as well. Guys, if you're interested in what we're talking about here, follow me. Come down to the Liminal Order. Sign up there, liminal-order.com. Also, Jack Brunch Tour. We are going to Chicago this weekend, September 12th. We are in New York City on September 26th. We are in Tampa on October 14th. In Nashville on October 26th. It is a Sunday social for those of us on the right side of things, lowercase r, however you want to interpret that. We need food and folk and fellowship, and we need to get together, break bread, and drink some wine together. So come to our events. Tickets are available on the website. You can just Google search it as well. Follow at Jack Brunch on Twitter, please. Everybody come. People always ask, is there a women's Liminal Order? Can my wife come? But no, there's no women in the Liminal Order, period. But we're opening these events up to everybody. Bring your wife, co-ed, bring your kids. It's going to be a great time. Jack Brunch. I hope to see you guys there. David, thank you so much. Congratulations on all of your success. Please keep up with Craig. I really love that. Would love to come back and talk to you guys another time when the time is right. And that is all, folks. We are out. On this show, we're driven by curiosity. We want to chart a path forward. Best people, best conversations. We're on a journey and it's just getting started.